By the late 1930s, America's highways were alive with change. The nation was shaking off the weight of the Depression, and the automobile was no longer the only machine shaping the way people traveled. Buses were on the rise, carrying workers, families, and soldiers-to-be across the land. Greyhound had already carved its place as a household name, its silver fleet stretching from coast to coast. General Motors and Yellow Coach built the machines that kept those routes alive, while A.C.F. Brill added its own sturdy designs. To many, it seemed the bus industry was already locked up by giants. But in Loudonville, Ohio, a smaller company had other ideas. The Flxible Company, best known at the time for ambulances and limousines, saw opportunity where others saw only closed doors. They believed that America's roads still had room for something different, something more refined. And in 1939, they unveiled their answer, the Flxible Clipper. The name alone carried a sense of promise. In those days, Pan American Airways had captured the public's imagination with its great flying boats, the Clippers, that crossed oceans with grace and speed. Flxible borrowed that imagery deliberately. Their new bus was meant to suggest the same spirit of elegance and forward motion, only this time it would be rolling down Route 66 or the Lincoln Highway instead of flying over the Pacific. For Flxible, it was a bold step. They had none of the market share or service network of GM, yet they pressed forward. The Clipper wasn't just another bus, it was a statement that even a smaller builder could rise to the occasion, offering operators and passengers alike a new vision of what highway travel could look like. From the very start, what set the Clipper apart was its appearance. In an era when most buses were still little more than rolling boxes, Flxible delivered a coach that looked modern and graceful. The body measured about 30 to 35 feet long and 96 inches wide, a size that struck a balance. Large enough for highway work, yet still nimble for smaller operators. Its all-steel monocoque construction gave it strength without the bulk of older body-on-frame machines. The styling carried the spirit of the late Art Deco years. The roof arched smoothly from front to back, giving the Clipper a silhouette that was instantly recognizable. Up front, a two-piece curved windshield opened the view for both driver and passengers, while the side windows, rounded at the corners, kept the lines flowing. The effect was a coach that seemed to be in motion even when parked, a design language borrowed more from aircraft than from earlier buses. Inside, riders found wide windows, padded seating, and cleaner finishes than many were used to. It was not luxury in the Pullman sense, but for everyday travelers it felt refreshing and even stylish. Still, there was a trade-off. Flxible's smaller scale meant Clippers were not always built to identical patterns. Details varied, parts didn't always interchange, and operators had to adapt. For the large fleets that prized uniformity, that was a weakness. Yet for smaller companies, and for the passengers who boarded them, the Clipper's design was exactly what made it unforgettable. Beneath that graceful body, the Clipper told a more complicated story. The earliest models carried Buick straight-8 gasoline engines, a choice that reflected Flxible's roots but not the changing needs of highway service. On city streets they were adequate, but once loaded with passengers and luggage on long grades, the gas engines showed their limits. They drank fuel heavily and offered little of the low-end torque that operators were beginning to demand. The solution came with diesel power. By the mid-1940s, many Clippers were delivered with Cummins diesels, and soon after with the Detroit Diesel 671, the legendary two-stroke that defined an era. With roughly 200 horsepower and a steady surge of torque, it gave the Clipper new life. The sound of a 671 pulling through the gears became part of the memory of American highways. Drivers appreciated the reliability, even if the manual transmissions and heavy steering meant the job still required muscle. Flxible's engineering was solid but less standardized than GM's. Parts interchangeability was not always certain, and operators sometimes had to improvise. The Clipper also lacked the automatic transmissions and power-assisted controls that would become common in later decades. Yet these limitations were typical of its time, and many smaller fleets accepted them as the price of owning a bus that looked and felt distinctive. The Clipper's mechanical heart may not have been perfect, but paired with its design, it was enough to carry Flxible into the conversation of serious highway coaches. With diesel power under its skin, the Clipper found its niche. It was never the backbone of Greyhound's Great Silver Fleet, nor did it dominate the schedules of trailways. Those giants looked to General Motors for uniform fleets, easy parts supply, and a vast service network. Flxible, by contrast, operated on a smaller scale, and so did its customers. Where the Clipper shined was with the independents, the regional carriers, charter companies, and family-owned lines that dotted the country. For them, a fleet of Clippers was affordable, stylish, and perfectly sized. Its 30 to 35-foot length worked well on rural highways and in tight depots where a 40-footer might be too cumbersome. The Clipper gave these operators a way to stand apart, offering passengers a ride that felt more polished than the bare-bones buses many small companies had used before. This role came with trade-offs. Because Flxible lacked GM's nationwide support, operators sometimes struggled with parts or technical advice. Large carriers saw that as an unacceptable risk. But for smaller firms, the benefits outweighed the drawbacks. The Clipper became a familiar sight on charter runs, church outings, and regional routes where personal service mattered more than corporate scale. In the end, the Clipper did not rewrite the industry, but it carved a respected space within it. It proved that even in a market dominated by giants, a well-designed coach could find loyal followers and keep rolling mile after mile. For passengers, stepping aboard a Flxible Clipper felt different from boarding many of the buses that came before it. The wide, rounded windows let in light and scenery, turning an ordinary trip into something closer to sightseeing. Seats were padded and neatly trimmed, a welcome change from the wooden benches or thinly upholstered chairs that riders still encountered on older coaches. On a regional line or a church outing, the Clipper offered comfort without pretense. Travel that felt modern, even a little glamorous, without being out of reach. The ride itself was steady, thanks to the solid steel body and balanced dimensions. It wasn't whisper quiet, of course, no bus of that era was, but the hum of the Detroit Diesel 671 carried a reassuring rhythm. Many travelers remembered that sound as much as the scenery, a mechanical heartbeat that meant progress mile after mile. For drivers, the experience was more demanding. The curved windshield gave excellent visibility, but the heavy steering and manual gearbox required stamina. Maneuvering through tight depots or climbing grades called for skill and strength. Yet many drivers respected the Clipper for its predictability. It might wear out their arms, but it rarely betrayed their trust. Together, these qualities gave the Clipper a reputation for character. It was not effortless, but it rewarded those who drove and rode it with memories that lasted. And in time, those memories would help keep the Clipper alive long after newer designs arrived. As newer coaches rolled onto the highways in the 1950s, the Flxible Clipper slowly slipped from the front lines. Larger models like the Visicoach and Starliner took its place in Flxible's catalog, while GM's 4104 and 4106 raised the bar for highway travel. Yet the Clipper never disappeared from memory. For many small operators, it had been the first truly modern coach they could afford, and for countless passengers, it was the bus that carried them to weddings, school trips, and vacations. Those experiences gave the Clipper a second life in nostalgia. Collectors began saving them as early as the 1970s, drawn to their rounded lines and unmistakable silhouette. Today, restored Clippers appear at vintage bus rallies, museums, and community parades, often gleaming brighter than they did when new. Some found even longer lives as motorhomes. The sturdy steel body and manageable size made the Clipper a favorite for conversion. allowing families to travel the country with a touch of history underfoot. Not every coach was preserved. Many fell victim to rust, hard use, or the scrapyard, but enough survived to keep the legend alive. What makes the Clipper's legacy so enduring is not perfection, but personality. It was never the biggest or most advanced, yet it left an impression deep enough that decades later, people still smile when they see one roll by. That enduring affection set the stage for its place in American bus history. To understand the Clipper's place in history, it helps to set it beside its rivals. General Motors' PD 3751 Silversides, introduced in 1940, quickly became the backbone of Greyhound's fleet. At 40 feet long with polished aluminum sides, the Silversides was bigger, more standardized, and backed by GM's service network. Compared with that, the Clipper seemed modest, shorter, lighter, and more limited in reach. Yet in terms of styling, many would argue the Flxible was the more graceful machine, with its rounded roof and curved glass capturing the spirit of the Art Deco age. Against ACF Brill coaches, the Clipper fared differently. Brill's products were sturdy but often boxy, carrying designs that looked older even when new. Here, the Clipper clearly outshone them, proving that even a small builder could produce a coach that turned heads. In many towns and on many charter runs, it became the bus people remembered not for size, but for beauty. The Clipper's influence lingered in subtler ways. Later, Flxible highway models borrowed elements of its styling, while city buses of the 1950s and 1960s adopted curved windshields and rounded lines that echoed its form. Even GM's later designs moved toward smoother profiles, a sign that the market had embraced what the Clipper helped pioneer. Measured purely by numbers, the Clipper never rivaled the giants. But measured by style and the affection it inspired, it stood tall, leaving a mark that shaped how Americans thought a bus ought to look. The Flxible Clipper may never have carried the sheer numbers of a Greyhound Silversides or the technical advances of GM's later 4104, but it earned something just as lasting: affection. It was the bus that gave smaller operators pride, that offered passengers a glimpse of elegance, and that showed America beauty could come in more than one size. Its curved roof and rounded glass still turn heads today, decades after the last one left service. And maybe that is the Clipper's greatest legacy. Not perfection, but personality. It carried memories as surely as it carried people, leaving behind stories of weddings, road trips, and family outings. How about you? Do you remember riding a Flxible Clipper, maybe on a charter or a trip across town? Share your memories in the comments. We'd love to hear your story. Like this video if it brought one back, and subscribe to join us on the next ride through America's transit history.